get started.
You are live.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the February 4th meeting of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. This is Kitty Crystal, the Commission Chair speaking. Welcome. We are starting by my clock at 7 o'clock on the dot. Given the ongoing public health emergency, we are obviously conducting this meeting electronically, and I'd like to just take a moment to note the Commission staff followed all of the rules and guidelines spelled out in the enabling authority that allows us to meet virtually, and that this meeting is simultaneously being broadcast to the public on YouTube. Just a couple of reminders with which I know we're all familiar. Please do mute your microphone when you're not speaking. That'll help cut down on background noise, especially with a larger meeting. We have our chat function, which you can always avail yourself of for technical difficulties and support, but it's important that we not conduct business, i.e. that we not comment on the proceedings or substantive discussions happen there. And when it comes time to make a vote, it is always helpful to me as your chair and to Rhonda Gilchrist, our secretary, if you could identify yourself when you are the maker or the seconder of the motion. She will conduct roll call votes, of which there are mercifully few in tonight's agenda. I'm going to ask her now to call the roll for quorum purposes and announce the staff participating. I'll also note that we have gotten word that Speaker Filler Corn and Delegate Rip Sullivan will not be present tonight for probably obvious reasons. So you will not hear their name when she calls the roll either for the quorum vote or future votes later in the evening. So Ms. Gilchrist, without further ado, over to you for roll call.
Thank you. Chair Crystal.
Here.
Mr. Gary.
Present.
Mr. Elkhorn.
Present.
Mr. Bell. Ms. Bennett Parker.
Present.
Mr. De Ferranti. Mr. Evan. Mr. Faust.
Here.
Ms. Garvey. Mr. Krizik.
Here.
Mr. Letourneau. Mr. McKay.
Here.
Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Ms. Palchik.
Present.
Mr. Reed. Mr. Smedberg. Mr. Snyder.
Here.
Mr. Turner.
Here.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Here.
Ms. Mitchell.
Here.
Mr. Stork.
Here.
And I believe I saw Senator Bell. Is that correct? He joined?
Libby Garvey's here. That helps.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,
We do have,
John Bell is here.
thank you. We do have quorum. The following staff are participating in the meeting. Executive Director Kate Mattice, Director of Finance and Administration Scott Colcorf, Director of Programs and Policy Alan Fye, NVTC Commission Secretary Rhonda Gilchrist, Web and IT Manager Melissa Walker, Wamana Program Manager Andrew DeVetter, Commuter Choice Senior Program Manager Ben Owen, Program Analyst Zachary Smith, Program Analyst Matt Cheng, Communications Manager Matthew Friedman, NVTC Legislative Liaison Amy Perrin-Seibert, NVTC Legal Counsel Steve McIsaac, WMATA's Virginia Government Relations Officer Greg Potts, VRE Chief Executive Officer Rich Dalton, VRE Chief Financial Officer Mark Schofield, and VRE Manager Project Development Christine Hefner. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gilchrist, and welcome everyone. A special thank you to our General Assembly members for making the time to be with us tonight. We're really glad to have your perspectives represented, and we know you've been polling some early mornings and late nights in recent weeks. So it's fortuitous that we're gathering on February 4th because February 4th is Transit Equity Day. And so I'm glad to have a chance to recognize this milestone, and particularly Rosa Parks, the well-known civil rights leader, whom the day honors because it is her birthday, was her birthday. And so it is an opportunity to reflect on her legacy and her challenge to inequality and racism by refusing to give up her seat on a segregated Montgomery bus in 1955. her actions and the actions of other plaintiffs and the Browder v. Gale decision led to not only the Montgomery bus boycott, but ultimately the Supreme Court's affirmation of a decision that declared segregation on buses unconstitutional. I know it's Black History Month. We're all reflecting on how far we still have to go in our own communities, as a region, nation, to challenge structural racism. But Public Transit Equity Day is a chance to remember that transit actually is a key tool that we have to address equitable access to jobs, to education, and to civic participation. So glad to take the chance to honor and celebrate Rosa Parks and remember that legacy and reaffirm our own commitment to transit equity this month of February and every month. All right, so I trust everyone has had an opportunity to review our agenda. You also should have received several blue sheet items prior to this meeting. That includes a resolution approving our commission's state transit grant applications, and that is something that the commission does on behalf of our jurisdictions. It's blue sheeted because our jurisdiction staff were finalizing the information right up until this meeting happened. So hopefully you've got that handy, as well as similarly, late breakingly, the list of applications all officially received under the Commuter Choice 395.95 program. And then finally, materials for our closed VRE item that will take place at the end of this meeting. We have just a couple of action items tonight. Our consent agenda, which includes the electronic meeting resolution, by now second nature to all of us, and that blue sheeted resolution approving the state transit grant applications to DRPT. We do have some important non-action items to discuss, of course, a report from Virginia Wamana board member and Wamana board chair, Paul Smedberg, from our VRE CEO, our DRPT director, presentations, and an initial opportunity for discussion on Wamana's fiscal year 2022 budget, a hot topic and quickly changing one. We'll receive a presentation on the general and administrative budget for this commission, as well as the 2021 to 2022 work plan. We'll update a little bit a proposal about when we'll formally ratify or take action on that budget, but tonight is an information item. Receive some updates on the legislative actions, not only in the federal space, but the state space, which has been rapidly moving, brief update on the Commuter Choice program. And then finally, as I noted, a closed session on a VRE item at the end of the meeting. All of that is on the agenda before you and hopefully well at hand as well in your meeting materials. And we will launch right in. We have one slide to highlight the release of our annual report. You all heard a lot of the substance about this, the accomplishments of the commission over 2020, the big news of the transportation omnibus bill just a year ago, and then everything we've done to adjust to life under COVID from the transit perspective. And Kate did Ms. Mattice did a great job of sort of sharing some of that content, reminding us all that the commission had achieved at last month's meeting. So we're just sharing this to give a sense of how good it all looks laid out together. And this is a great opportunity to really spotlight Matt Friedman, whom you all may not have had the opportunity to meet during the pandemic. He is the commission's manager of outreach and communications. This is really a beautiful piece of work, and we congratulate him for it. You can expect to receive a digital copy of this annual report to you tomorrow, and to many other stakeholders in our region who are interested in the commission's going ons will be receiving it as well. So Matt, thank you again. Eagle-eyed commissioners will note that our commission materials also have a new look and feel and polished letterhead, and that's a credit to Matt as well. Okay, so unless there are any questions about that annual report or our agenda, just looking around at faces and seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move us into the consent agenda, which is again the need for the resolution, finding the need to meet electronically, and then approving the state transit assistance applications to DRPT. So again, receive that in blue sheet. This is something that the commission staff do in partnership with our jurisdictions. So before we jump into the consent agenda, Kate, did we receive any comments from the public?
We did not.
Okay, thank you very much. I would love to entertain a motion to approve those two items on the consent agenda.
So moved, Libby.
Thank you very much, Ms. Garvey. Did I hear a second from Chairman McKay?
You did.
Great, thank you much. Any further discussion? Any desire to hear either of those items separately from the consent agenda? All right, hearing none, I don't think. Let me turn it to Ms. Gilchrist for a roll call vote.
Chair Crystal,
Yes, aye.
Mr. Aguirre,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bell,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Dave Ferrenti, Mr. Evan, Mr. Faust,
Aye.
Ms. Garvey,
Aye.
Mr. Krizik,
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau, Mr. McKay,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik,
Aye.
Mr. Reed, Mr. Smedberg,
Aye.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Turner,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
The vote passes. I'll now turn it back to the chair.
Great, thank you so much. All right, one more roll call vote ahead, which is to approve the minutes of our meeting from January 7th. Do I have a motion for approval of those minutes?
I so move.
Thank you, Ms.
Second.
Pelchik.
Second, Bennett
Seconded by
Parker.
Ms. Bennett Parker. Thank you both so much. Any discussion or corrections, amendments to the minutes from January 7th? All right, hearing none, back to you, Ms. Gilchrist, for a roll call vote.
Please respond with yea, nay, or abstain. Chair Crystal,
Yay.
Mr. Gary,
Yay.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bell,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Dave Ferrenti, Mr. Evan, Mr. Faust,
Aye.
Ms. Garvey,
Yay.
Mr. Krizik,
Here. Or yes.
Mr. Letourneau, Mr. McKay,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik,
Aye.
Mr. Reed, Mr. Smedberg, Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Turner,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gilchrist. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into the meat of our conversation tonight, beginning with a report on Wamana. I'd like to welcome Mr. Smedberg to give a few comments, and just note, as our colleague Mr. Letourneau is continuing to recover from and contend with some of the consequences of those injuries he sustained earlier in the year, that we are thinking about him. Okay, so with that, Mr. Smedberg, over to you for a Wamana board report.
Thank you, Chair Crystal. Matt and I really don't have too much of a report this evening. It's fairly straightforward, just some updates. Many of them you might be aware of already. It won't be till our next meeting. We're just starting. Next week we have a series of committee meetings, and we're going to be really getting into the fiscal year 22 budget at that time in detail. But Matt and I did want to provide, or Mr. Letourneau and I wanted to provide you with this current update. So last month, the Wamana board approved an amendment to the fiscal year 2021 operating budget with an infusion of federal aid from the second relief bill. So this gave Wamana the ability to use $95.6 million in this new federal aid to continue essential transit services and avoid layoffs that were previously approved for the end of fiscal year 21. Starting in the spring, the region can expect the following service levels. Metro Rail will standardize weekday and off-peak rail service frequencies on each line, operating from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. Metro bus service will increase to 82% of pre-pandemic service. Metrobus is currently operating at 78% of pre-pandemic service, and added service will help reduce crowding and restore service on some additional lines. Also last month, the board authorized a public hearing on revisions to the general manager's proposed fiscal year 22 budget and the fiscal year 2022 through 2027 capital improvement program. At the January commission meeting, we provided the commission with a very high level overview of what to expect for that revised budget. And like I said, next week we'll be hearing a lot more detail coming in from Wamana staff. So also since that time in our last meeting, the NVTC Wamana committee met and had a very good discussion on the proposed fiscal year 22 Wamana budget. Chairman Aguirre and NVTC staff will tee up additional information and discussion on the proposed budget. So we will hold any additional comments we have for that section of the agenda, which is next. So, Madam Chair, that concludes our report.
Thank you, Mr. Smedberg. It's quite a thing to be in two budgets at once with fiscal 21. Thank you for the reminder about next month being one of the bigger opportunities to weigh in on fiscal 22, because I think we're all following that really closely, especially having watched mercifully, the federal designation is allowing the general manager to walk back the sort of most draconian cuts, at least through, as you were noting, the calendar year.
Yeah. So, Madam Chair, one other thing I did want to let you know about, and the commission know about, just the other day, our regional delegation is taking the leadership on PREA reauthorization. So that would include $150 million over a period of, I think was it 10 years, for Wamana. Senator Warner has introduced the Senate version of that bill. Congressman Conley has introduced the House version. They are not identical, so there will have to be some, reconciliation there between the two. But just wanted people to be aware of that. We worked with the various parties on some language, and so we'll be reporting back to everyone on that, and hopefully we'll have a positive resolution, because that PREA money is important for Wamana funding.
Yeah.
On the capital side. Yeah.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Mike Turner.
Absolutely, Mr. Turner.
Mr. Smedberg, can you clarify for me? I'm not sure I heard it correctly. When will these service levels start to take effect? I think you said after the spring, as in 1 July, or is it in the spring?
To be determined. I mean, definitely by July, but depending on how things go next week, it could be sooner than that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me do this. I know that we have, after the report from our Wamana committee, or as part of the report from our Wamana committee, a presentation from Mr. Doyvetter, who's been maybe doing even more detailed analysis on the fiscal 22 budget. So why don't we go ahead and turn it over to our Vice Chairman, Ken Aguirre, to talk a little bit about the Wamana committee's work, tee up that presentation, and then we can maybe have a more fulsome conversation and questions on both those items and Mr. Smedberg's presentation following that. So, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to do a quick check that you guys could hear me, because I've been seeing a lot of sparkles. So our NVTC Wamana committee met on January 21st, where we received a presentation from staff and had a very robust conversation on recent revisions to Wamana's proposed FY22 budget. This revised proposed budget fully utilizes additional federal aid to maintain service levels and postpones layoffs until about January of 2022, where service cuts and layoffs are needed to close the remaining budget gap. The actions necessary to close the budget gap and the individual trade-offs they entail was a source of much discussion by committee members. We're going to turn it over to staff now to provide us with an overview of the budget and themes for the Wamana budget letter that incorporate the committee's comments.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Aguirre. Can everybody hear me? Excellent. So I'll provide an overview of the revisions to Wamana's proposed FY22 budget and provide a summary of the committee's discussion of that budget from their January 21st committee meeting. Those comments which you will see in a few slides, will then form a letter which staff will submit as part of the public comment period on the WMATA budget. Next slide, please. As mentioned by Mr. Smedberg, Congress recently passed the Coronavirus Response and Relief Act in December. WMATA estimates to receive approximately $610 million from the Second Relief Act, which WMATA has applied to the FY21 and 22 budgets. However, even with the additional relief funding, WMATA does project a funding gap of $209.8 million for the FY22 operating budget. And last month, the WMATA board received an update on this and authorized the budget to go out for public comment. Next slide. The proposed gap is addressed in a number of ways. The first includes management actions, which total about $58 million in savings. These include contractor cost reductions, deferment of wage increases for non-represented and represented personnel, and employee management programs such as voluntary separation. After that, the main proposals to address the budget gap are Metro Rail and Metro Bus service reductions. These would begin in January of 2022, which is when WMATA expects the additional federal aid to be exhausted. For Metro Rail, we would see a continuation of rail service at about 80% of pre-pandemic levels from July to December of 2021. For the latter half of the year, from January to June of 22, we would see service reduced to about 30% of pre-pandemic levels. This would mean shorter hours of operation, headways of 30 minutes for most lines, and 22 closed stations. And savings would be incurred from FTE reductions. For Metrobus, we'd see something similar where service is continued at about 82% of pre-pandemic service levels for the first half of the year. And then starting in January, this would be reduced by consolidating a number of lines, and it would eventually represent about 50% of pre-pandemic service levels. And again, savings will be incurred from FTE reductions. And lastly, there's a placeholder in the budget for additional costs associated with Title VI adjustments that are related to the opening of the Silver Line Phase 2. Next slide, please. There are some other key highlights other than what closes the gap that are important to mention about the proposed budget. The first is that this proposal does forego the 3% subsidy growth. And it is important to note that while it does forego that growth, there are still some $42 million in additional costs that would be added to the subsidy, which are related to the Silver Line Phase 2, cinder bed, road bus facility, and some other safety mandates. The proposed budget does assume the Silver Line starting revenue service in July, and as opposed to the previous proposed budget from December, the one before us does not shift any additional operating expenses to the capital program for preventive maintenance. And then lastly, and very important here, is that this proposed budget does include an estimated $108 million of the relief aid, which would be a credit for local transit operators. And this is proposed to be very similar to how this was handled in the first CARES Act. And WMATA is having a lot of discussions on this, so I think we'll know a lot more in the coming weeks or months, but obviously it's quite welcome. Next slide, please. As the chairman mentioned, we had a good discussion at the January 21st committee meeting. And so before you on the slide are staff's proposed themes and comments to include in a letter of public comment. And this version does include the feedback that we heard from the committee. So this is the latest and greatest. The first is to open Silver Line Phase 2 as soon as possible with service, full service to all stations. Second is minimizing to the greatest extent possible shifting operating expenses to the capital program for preventive maintenance. And this is to maintain a state of good repair for the capital program and preserve dedicated funding debt capacity in the long term. Third is to maintain dependable and sufficient levels of service throughout fiscal 22 to avoid those significant reductions that I previously mentioned where possible for the latter half of the year, and to avoid adversely impacting essential workers' needed access to transit and curtailing the region's recovery efforts. The fourth is to encourage regional employers to develop solutions to increase ridership. Increasing ridership safely, of course, is key to cost recovery in the budget. And then last, and perhaps most important here, is to continue to seek additional federal support to avoid layoffs and support the region in recovering from the economic fallout of the pandemic. And next slide. And last here, as far as next steps, we're working back from an anticipated WMATA board approval of the budget April. We will take additional comments on the themes this evening, and then we will work with Chair Aguirre to refine and develop a draft letter. At the March Commission meeting, we anticipate asking the Commission to authorize Chair Crystal to submit a letter of comments on the FY22 budget, and then staff will make sure that we get that in during the public comment period. And just as a reminder, the WMATA General Manager will speak at the March Commission meeting. And with that, I will turn it back to Chair Aguirre.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I just want to remind everybody a couple things. There will be definitely additional WMATA board work sessions, and WMATA staff will hold a public comment period from mid-February to mid-March. Staff will continue to engage in the budget process for the next few months and will prepare updated themes at our March Commission meeting in anticipation of formally submitting comments on the FY22 budget. And also want to remind everyone that, as always, we encourage each of our jurisdictions to provide their own FY22 budget comments to WMATA as well. And Chair Crystal, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the WMATA committee, who's had quite a full plate in your committee work. So maybe to sort of summarize for discussion before us, as Mr. Doiver presented, we do have those themes, and I wonder if it might be helpful to pull that slide back up actually as we discuss. So our staff and I think the WMATA committee will use this discussion tonight to see if we want to. Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking the proposed feedback themes. We'll use our feedback on the feedback to home in on some key ideas in a letter that the commission will submit in response to the call for public comment on the budget. So this could be a great opportunity for other members of the commission to weigh in on whether these seem like the right themes to you. Obviously, you know, there's a real balance throughout here, right? Wanting to use those federal funds wisely. I think it's salient that obviously, you know, wanting to tailor service to what there is demand for, but also recognizing, as I know we discussed at length in the prior meeting, that service cannot be reduced without layoffs, and it's never costless, not only to those individuals, but also to the system when you have layoffs, because we lose that talent and training. And so this is a real dance, I think, that the WMATA board will be faced with, and I know our WMATA committee's been wrestling with. I think it's reflected well in these themes. But let me invite other comments, or this would be a great opportunity too for questions if you have them of Mr. Smedberg with the WMATA committee or our hardworking WMATA staff on the commission.
Chair Crystal, I have a question.
Please give us your Polchik.
Thank you. Really appreciate this presentation. And first of all, I assume my colleagues will join me in, you know, doubling, tripling that first bullet point. You know, we are very eager, and I know Supervisor Faust and Alcorn and I are very eager to see Silverline Phase 2 completion. So appreciate that really being there. Also, I really like the bullet on engaging regional employers to develop innovative solutions. You know, I think we've been asking for some of those as we return. So that's much appreciated. A question on that is, do we want to limit it just to regional employers? I don't know, WMATA, I think they've started to look at working with universities, perhaps in DC or other educational institutions. So, you know, there are employers as well, but really looking at as many opportunities as possible for that innovative solutions. But I think it's a great suggestion.
I agree. I think I know Mr. Snyder was making a not entirely dissimilar point earlier in the evening when we met as executive committee, that beyond just new funding sources and or funding cuts, there's also that question about the role of employers, especially as our partners in helping bring back ridership. Other feedback on the feedback? Oh, please. Yeah, I see Mr. Meyer there.
I would like to share with the commission that there was a very heartfelt and candid exchange of views regarding the second bullet. We all understand and that we do not want to have layoffs. We do not want to see degradation in service, and that there are tremendous pressures on the operating side of the Wamana budget. Having said that, there was also an acknowledgement that while it is in the short term very tempting, if not to some perspectives necessary, to use some of capital funds to help with maintenance, with operating expenses. This is what got the system into the problem that it found itself 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. But those problems that we confronted across the DMV 3 years ago, 2 years ago, really started 12, 14 years previously, putting off capital investment and preventive maintenance to keep us in a state of good repair by deferring or using funds that were intended initially for capital improvements to cover operating expenses. We are in a very challenging time with respect to the system, but I do want to emphasize that this is not a good practice long term, and I personally would like to see a strong firewall between the capital funds that are intended for bringing us back to a state of good repair and those that are operating expenses, recognizing that there are many jobs and service cuts have an impact on our local economy and a regional economic health. So I'm just putting it out there on the table to say that we need to be very mindful of the danger long term of relying on capital funds that were intended to improve the system and using them for operating costs. Thank you.
Madam Chair, this is Senator Bell. I have a quick question.
Please, Senator.
Yeah. Obviously, we don't know the status of this yet, but I know in what President Biden proposed in the initial $1.9 trillion aid package was significant money for public transit programs, which across the country are hurting. It sounds like there'll be something in between what he offered and what right now the Republicans are negotiating, which is what $600 billion, far short of that. Have you all given any thought to if this does come to play and we do get this kind of assistance for transit, what would be the plan and what would be your priorities then to restore funding? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smedberg, I know you were just giving us an update in our executive session about what WMATA is hearing on the likelihood or maybe lack thereof of more transit funding in a future federal round. Would you be willing to share that perspective again?
Sure. We worked very closely with our regional congressional delegation, and they've been extremely supportive. We're very, very grateful to them. And Senator Warner in particular really did a lot of work to get that money. The support for transit is not very deep, to be perfectly honest. I mean, it was a heavy lift to get the second tranche of money over the line. It is good to see that the president does have a 20 or so billion in his proposal for transit. However, we are hearing that there will likely be some pushback about a third tranche of money, and it may be directed more toward projects or buying, say, a fleet of buses, help with electrification of buses, help with rehabilitation or state of good repair projects, things like that. It might be more targeted. We're hearing more and more that earmarks may be coming back with some of these proposals on the Hill. So, to be determined. but you know, at least there is a placeholder there with it, because the support on the, you know, quite honestly, on the Republican side is not very, you know, is essentially non-existent, and even on the Democratic side, it really took a lot of work to get support to bring it over the finish line. So.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your advocacy. It's it's disappointing to hear that, you know, the support isn't stronger, because frankly, if we're going to make a comeback in our economy, it's going to be much quicker if obviously we have our transportation infrastructure and our systems working. So thank you for that update.
Yeah, well, I think some of the things complicating it, Senator Bell, one of the factors is that there was no money for state and local support in the last go around. So that's very much top of mind for folks going into this discussion in the coming month or two. So.
For us too, I think, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I'll just add from a state, you know, perspective. I know Delegate Krizak, you know, on appropriations, sure would back me up. I mean, we're hoping for significant funds, you know, to help fill the many holes we have. But you know, they're all over. I mean, I know our airlines are hurting, but certainly our transportation systems are critical. So obviously we'll do all we can, but I hope that that they do come to a realization that, you know, we got systems across the country that are, you know, frankly, literally going to go under if they don't get some help in many cases.
And Senator Bell, there is some just simple raw politics to this. If you look at where the large transit systems are located, you know, they're almost exclusively in blue states and are blue themselves. So that's also a factor.
Thank you. It's a good discussion. And, you know, perhaps as earmarks come back like many other 1990s trends making a renewed appearance.
Yeah.
Knowing how effective, frankly, members of our Virginia delegation have been in advocating for Metro, that may be an arena we stay more informed of and look to pursue.
Yep.
Okay, so other thoughts, questions for Mr. Smedberg, for Wamana committee, thoughts on this feedback? Yeah, I see Mr. Snyder there.
Sure. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Good.
We can.
So I want to thank everybody involved. This is obviously very tough stuff. Looking at slide 12, I want to make a particular pitch for the third point. I think the notion which is out there that you spend at a very high level and then you drop down to practically nothing, which is one budget option, seems to me not a very prudent thing to do. You're much better off to modulate your service and provide at least a moderate level of service across the whole year, as opposed to very high level and then drop down to closing 29 stations, the 30-minute headway, the kind of stuff that pretty much eliminates rail as a usable option for large parts of the region. So I want to urge a more smooth approach, if you will, to 2022. And to make the other rather obvious point, we've really got to keep an eye on how the region and the country are doing to get control over the pandemic. And frankly, we need to be advocates there as much as for advocates for federal funding. In the absence of controlling the pandemic, the much better option is get this thing under control and not have to have these constant capital infusions from the federal government. So I guess what I'm saying is to us, the third bullet point, the third point is very important. And I would urge a much more smooth approach to 2022, as opposed to very high levels of service at 80% and then dropping down to 30%. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to make a couple comments.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could, just one note.
Please, yeah.
On March 10th, I'll be chairing the Virginia hearing. Joining me that day will be Commissioner Alcorn. who is one of the alternate directors to the WMATA board. So we'll have that hearing, and we'll make sure that we get the information out to folks in plenty of time so they can participate if they'd like.
Thank you. All right. I think we may be slowing down in terms of questions or comments, just trying to read faces here. And just wanted to echo again what Mr. Doivetter shared, which is that next month we will be welcoming the general manager of WMATA to come talk with us, which is a good opportunity to ask questions about the budget, pandemic management, how we'll be working as a region to steer ourselves out of this, and so forth. So please do be thinking of some important questions. We're glad to have his time, and I think it's a great way for us to exercise our important oversight duties that have been delegated to us as the commission when it comes to the interest of the region or Northern Virginia in Metro. Okay, so if there is nothing else for the good of the order on Metro, I am going to turn us now to the fiscal 22 budget of this commission. So I have Ms. Matthijs to talk to us and give us an informational presentation about the budget. So let me tee her up by sharing maybe a little bit of a programming change and the recommendation of the executive committee. Back in November, we voted on a resolution that would move the approval of our fiscal 22 general administrative budget to the winter. And the goal there was that staff would have the most up-to-date information, certainly from the General Assembly budget, which, as you all know, actually comprises the majority of the commission's budget, although it is passed through us as localities. The idea was that we'd have a little more clarity on that picture. We may have a little more clarity on our own budget picture. I wonder if, personally, we naively thought in November, maybe by February, we'll have a sense of how this pandemic's effect on our lives is changing. As I think is immediately resonant with anyone trying to work on a local or state budget, that surety or answers have been in short supply. So here's our proposal, and this is on behalf of the executive committee and certainly one that I strongly support, which is we don't actually need, for operational purposes or per our bylaws, to have this budget adopted in the next couple of months. We actually can adopt it in May or even as late as June for it to be effective in time for the fiscal year. So the proposal at hand is that Kate will walk us through this kind of emerging budget, a couple of options as they're shaping up, what it means for the work plan. And then we don't actually hear this, the proposal is, that we don't actually hear this as a commission for a vote until later in the spring. At that time, we'll have, I hope, more certainty on the state budget, right? Since you all at the General Assembly are working hard to pass it. We'll also have more clarity on our jurisdictional budget. That's salient, not because our general funds support NVTC. I think it's important as a reminder that is by and large not the case. But I know that for optics reasons or fairness reasons, for a lot of commissioners, just a sense of sort of how compensation is shaping out in their home jurisdictions informs how they think about compensation for the commission, which is, of course, the largest driver of the commission's budget. So those are the two things that we're thinking we would have a little more insight on come May or even closer to June. So we'd receive information on the budget. We'd be briefed on how it's coming together. We don't want anyone to feel in the dark about it. But the proposal is that we wouldn't act until May or June. So I'm going to now turn it over to Kate to present this budget for information items, but please do think in the back of your head, if you have concerns about that, just questions about how it will work, or worries about doing it sort of after the local budgets are adopted, please do, we'll have an opportunity for discussion, and that'll be a great opportunity to air or raise those concerns. So Kate, let me give it over to you for more of the details.
Fantastic. Thank you, Madam Chair. In fact, I just want to go to the next slide. What I really wanted to do was give an opportunity, especially because we do have a lot of relatively new commissioners. There's sort of a little background of sort of what makes up our budget, where our revenues are coming from, which I think is a direct conversation that Chair Crystal was just having, and then talk about sort of the options that we've put together. So when it comes to what is NVTC, when it comes to our budget, it really is the people. And so We do have some contracted out services for human resources, for our general counsel, also support that we do for the Commuter Choice program. But really, when it comes to it, it is really about our people. Obviously, you get an opportunity every meeting to see the results of a lot of the work that our folks are doing. This is not, what I have up on here on the slide is basically in a typical year. Obviously, it goes up and down a little bit. But in general, about 68% of our operating budget, which is roughly around 3.8 million, is really coming from our people. And so that's part of the reason why Chair Crystal was talking about the sensitivity and looking at compensation, those sorts of things, because that is really, outside of some fixed costs, that's really the area where we have some opportunity within our budget. So just to go to the next slide. So the sources of our revenue really do come in from a number of different areas. We do have a small amount, about 8%, that actually does come from our jurisdictions, from your general budgets. That is information that we actually pass usually in the fall, so it's nice and early for your budget process. And it's roughly about $257,000 total. That's actually a dollar value that has been fixed for 10 plus years. I'm sure Scott could give me the exact number, but that's something that we've actually really tried to minimize. Because of our involvement in managing the state aid on behalf of our jurisdictions, that's where the opportunity comes to be funding us. So about 56% of the funding that supports our folks, our people, our general administrative budget does come off the top of state aid. It does also, I should say, come off the top of our Commuter Choice program. And that's something that's approved separately from the by the Commonwealth Transportation Board. So when you look at that amount of money that's coming, when it compares to, and this is something that sort of I've been enlightened over the last couple of years as I learn and grow in my own position here, is it's about, if you want to call it an overhead, we're only at about 1.2% takedown from all of the money that we're managing on behalf of our jurisdiction. So I'm actually incredibly proud of that. Basically, and we're able to do a ton of things for our jurisdictions, but yet really the pass down that they provide to us is really a small percentage of the revenue that they're receiving from DRPT. The other thing that I wanted to bring in here, and this is where plays into some of our budget documents, and all the details were provided to you in the meeting materials, we do actually look to carry over funding from previous years. And so this is something that actually has been very helpful in last years. And again, because we are an organization that is primarily people, the most time our carryover funding is actually because we've had a gap in staffing. Let's say an employee has left, there's a couple months before we're able to hire. So we have sort of a good and bad thing this year. The good thing is we've had the same staff for over a year and a half, which is absolutely fantastic. They are just a great group of people. So we have not seen anybody leave. So actually, though, as a result, we do not have as much carryover this year as we would have in other years. However, Scott provided some details within the budget documents, we are able to identify some revenues, some carryover from this actual fiscal year. Usually you look to the 1 year previous, but just knowing there are some costs that we've been able to save money on this year, mostly because we're virtual. Everything from being able to provide you with good meals and other things associated with printing and things like that, we've actually been able to save some things. So we've been able to roll those into the proposed budget. So let's go to the next slide. So what we provided for you as an information, again, within the materials is actually two different approaches. Both of them are really geared towards a budget that is trying to stay as close as possible to this current fiscal year's budget. So we're not talking about a significant growth from year to year. And so obviously we rolled up our sleeves, identified places where we could trim back. But one of the things that we did want to be very mindful of is, again, the really strong performance of our staff. Is some conversation points that we hope to come back with you in the spring is about what that looks like for our compensation for our employees, cost of living, merit increases, and those sorts of things. So what we provided to you, again, just for background and information, are two different approaches that look at that. And so again, when we look at the level of work we're doing, it's still really all about rolling up our sleeves, making sure the commission shines in everything that you do. Obviously, all of our financial management. We're not envisioning mass changes in what we do as an organization. We do have a number of commitments that we are required to meet from the state, from the federal government, from Commuter Choice. And so we plan on, within this budget, to be able to meet all of those commitments. Really, the fundamental difference is our ability to reward the fantastic staff that we have. And so that, that really comes to the heart of our budget proposal. I do want to transition over to the work plan just for a moment, if that's okay, Chair Katie, and then we can just wrap it. So one of the things that articulates what we plan on doing in the coming year, and this is just going to the next slide, is our work plan. And this is something that actually NVTC has been doing for a very, very long time. And it basically organizes our deliverables and the other things that we plan on doing that really are budget supporting. And so it's organized in things that are very, very familiar to you. And so really capturing all of the different activities that we're doing as an organization. And if we go to the next slide, there's a lot here. I'm not going to read it, but really what we've identified is, all the deliverables, all the actions, all the key things that we really need to get done. This is something we actually share with the MAC. That's our Management Advisory Council. Those are the jurisdictional staff that support us every month. And obviously hearing from all of you on the different types of analysis, for example, that you'd like us to be able to do. And so that again was included in your materials. As we move forward, assuming we're able to, we will come back with this again. Obviously, any questions or comments of things you'd like to either see us changing or adding or subtracting from what we're doing insofar that it relates to our budget, we'll be mindful of that. But that's pretty much, I find the work plan is incredibly helpful because as it is to the staff, it's our roadmap and expectations for what we need to be delivering and performing with the budget that we've had approved from all of you. And so I think that is end. I just want to make sure I covered everything here. Yeah, so to pause right here, the other thing, and I don't have a slide on this, this is actually, which is public comment. We actually solicit public comment every year on our work plan. And actually, those who've been with the commission a couple of years, it's the time, usually it's only once a year. And so we usually have a handful of folks coming to provide public comment. And we actually did, I think, a fairly in-depth outreach, and we did not get any public comments on our work plan this year. Though I think we'll recognize that we do sometimes get public comments during our specific meetings. So there are no public comments on our work plan for me to share. That was going to be a part of the agenda, but we did not receive any.
Well, thank you, Kate. Thanks for letting us know about that. All right, so quite a bit there, right, between both the work plan and the budget substance as well as the sort of budget process proposal. Let me throw open the floor for questions or comments on any of it. Oh, Ms. Garvey, yes, please.
Yeah, no, I'll just say thank you. I'm looking this through. It's going to take a while to sort of digest everything on the deliverables page, but no, it's great. And we've got time to do it. I think postponing the budget I think that's smart. I would say I'm pleased to see a number of post-COVID issues, the market campaign, which I think is going to be tremendously important, and also analysis of what's transportation going to be like post-COVID. So, and there's so many variables in there. So I think that's all really good, and just look forward to kind of working this through over the next few months. And I assume you'll bring forward to us things that we need to, really be looking at. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Garvey. Any other comments or questions? Okay. I'm also not hearing strong objections to the proposal to see this again in the spring. It also has the benefit at a time when everybody's minds are bogged down with a lot of local and state stuff of alleviating one more budget to review. So perhaps not the worst thing in the world. All right, well, Kate, thank you. And thank you for the detailed work plan presentation as well. I, for one, am looking forward to a more focused discussion and approval later in the spring. Okay, so speaking of what is occupying quite a bit of time for, I know, our General Assembly members and maybe even some of our locals as well, the report of the chair of the Legislative and Policy Committee. The General Assembly is, of course, in session. So I am going to invite our Legislative and Policy Committee Chairman, David Meyer, who's been working closely with our Legislative Liaison, Amy Parent-Seibert, and of course, our Executive Director, to follow all of that General Assembly Committee activity and advocate for our interest as Wamana payers as well as transit stakeholders. So I'll invite them to give comments, and then I think it probably makes sense to go ahead and get all of our presentations done at the same time. We'll turn it next to Kate to give us an update on the federal space, and then we'll have discussion, and certainly our members of the General Assembly can add anything that we've missed, since you all are living it day in and day out. So, Mr. Meyer, thank you for your work, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Crystal. This past Tuesday, February 2, the committee met and we discussed both what was happening at the GA as well as some developments on the federal level. And because there was so much that occurred last year, this is not necessarily going to be a banner year for new transportation legislation at the GA level. However, what is first and foremost for the NVTC, of course, is our request for a one-time payment from the general fund to the NVTC of $30 million to enable the 8 jurisdictions in Northern Virginia to meet their commitments to Metro. We have with all due respect to those members of the GA who are joining us this evening, this doesn't necessarily apply to them, but we do have among some members of the House and the Senate an education challenge. And in my conversations with a couple of members, they immediately said, well, we thought that the Relief Act that came in January took care of Metro's challenges. And the response, of course, is, oh, yes, it was a huge infusion and it stopped the bleeding, but it wasn't as omnibus as we would like for it to be. There are still some very serious shortfalls, and this request of $30 million is critical for our region to be able to meet our commitments. There is to not make these payments is not an option. It's a double negative, but we have to come up with these funds, and we all know as representatives from our other local governments that we are all facing severe budget challenges in our local jurisdictions. So that's the big focus. Obviously, our work in this area is extremely dynamic and changing, not just every day, but every hour. And since Tuesday, we garnered a lot of support from members across the region. There's been a lot of phone calls, text messages, letters in support. So we're doing probably more blitzing this year than we have ever done, recognizing that there are other non-transportation pressures on the General Assembly this year from a whole host of areas. So a lot of new initiatives that different members are expecting the Assembly to consider. But this is one of our core responsibilities. And I think the big message is this is critical not only to our region's economic recovery, but also to the entire Commonwealth's GDP. So I will recognize Amy or Kate if they want to comment further on any specific developments since Tuesday, and also any members of the commission who are living and breathing this every moment.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is Amy Parent-Seibert, and I will. I don't have too much to add because I think you actually covered most of what I was going to say. But what I will say is just a sort of a resounding thank you to all the commissioners who have done really just a lot of yeoman's work between Tuesday and today with reaching out and contacting your legislators, and both as making phone calls, sending emails, getting letters done. You and your liaisons have done an amazing job, and we really appreciate it because it is really critical for them to hear from you, because obviously the money that NVTC is asking for is for the localities to be able to pay their Metro bill. it's not direct money for Metro. And so it's really important for them to hear from you about how necessary this is. So obviously, like you said, there's a lot of pressures this year in the budget. I think the biggest issue, and I will defer obviously to Delegate Krizik on this, but one of the biggest issues is that the February reforecast doesn't come out until after the budget gets done on Sunday. So that's challenging. That's a very challenging thing for the members to have to kind of create a budget, but know that they don't have all the information while they're doing it. So I think what we can expect is that, this process is certainly not over on Sunday. It is really kind of the start of it. So we will continue to keep working and advocating, and just wanted to thank all of the legislative members of the commission as well for all your work at the General Assembly and talking to your colleagues about what we've been working on. So with that, I will turn it over to Delegate Krizik to see if he has anything that he'd like to add.
Well, Sunday's the big day but it's not the Tom Brady show. It's the budget reveal, and but it's just the House budget. And as Amy said, this is a process. I'll be making my presentation Sunday around 1:30 or so as chair of Transportation and Public Safety Subcommittee on Appropriations, and I'm hoping I have some good news. We're working as soon as until this meeting started, and as soon as this meeting's over, I'm talking with appropriations staff and members deep into the night, and the next 2 days are really all about appropriations for us and the budget. So if there's no good news on Sunday, it doesn't mean it's over. And we do have the revenue reforecast, which we're optimistic about. And we're hoping that it comes in much higher than anyone expects. And then we have the problem of trying to figure out where to spend all the money. So I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, but I am trying to make that pitch in case we can't get it on Saturday. And of course, there's the Senate side, and then there'll be the conference side of it. And so I'm optimistic that something will happen, but it's still under consideration. That's really all I can tell you right now. But we're working it hard, and I do appreciate. I know Libby Garvey sent me a very good email with a lot of good talking points that have been helpful. I've talked to Dahlia Palchik, and she's been helpful, and we've got a number of. You'd think with all the Northern Virginians now in charge, it would be a no-brainer, but there are a lot of competing expenditures out there. We're doing a lot of big things, especially in criminal justice, marijuana legalization, and we're looking out for you guys so that you'll be able to have some income from that certainly. So there's a lot going on. It has been the busiest session that I've ever been involved in. It starts at 7 a.m. every morning with subcommittee or committee meetings, and it doesn't really end until 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm really exhausted, but it's being online the whole time too. It's tough, and it also makes it difficult to lobby your colleagues, and have those hallway discussions, and the winks and the nods and everything in the committee meetings. You're unable to do that. We're all doing great with this online way, and it's much safer, and it's the best thing to do, but I can't wait till we get back to normal. So I guess that's my report. I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful, and I'm trying. We'll see. I was hoping the speaker will be, but I know she's got bigger fish to fry right now. Tomorrow's crossover, so it's another, and then we just announced that we're going to have a special session that starts next Wednesday. So this is a continuing saga. And, I'm there for you, and I'm trying my best.
We appreciate you so much. I can tell you, having to testify at one of your committees at 7 a.m. one day, I was like, that really was a lift. I can't imagine how y'all been doing it every day. So thank you. Just really, this is I think our committee chair put it well, that we're just really fortunate to have you all advocating for us, along with each of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commissioners who's been serving in key committees and otherwise advocating for this. Thank you, most sincerely. So questions, anything else to add from, I don't know if any other members of our General Assembly wanted to add thoughts on that, the prospects of that key legislative push or anything else transit related that we may have missed. Senator Bill.
Senator Bell, I'll just say I agree with everything Paul just said. It's been a very challenging session. I mean, we're doing sort of a hybrid in the Senate. I'm down in Richmond now. We meet and then people testify, and we try to get as many people involved testimony through virtual. But as Paul said, you really miss a lot without having people in the room. In spite of our best efforts, technology doesn't always work as well as we want it to, so sometimes people get left out. But we do everything we can to get them involved, and obviously that's what we have to do to be safe. I will tell you, the Virginia economy is resilient. It's come back quicker than any of the estimates thought it would, which is a great testament to everybody. Fortunately, we've been able to have many more people work from home. And that, wages have come in better than we thought, and basically all the estimates have come in better than we thought. So there's really good news there, and I think overall it's going to be a really good budget. We still are, we have a lot of unknowns still. What comes out of the federal government is probably the biggest elephant in the room right now, and that is going to take some special session time to really go through that, but. I will tell you, we're fighting for NVTC. We're fighting for public transportation. It's critical. If we really want our economy to come back, we're going to need these resources. And like I said, I feel like it's a problem across America. In Virginia, we're in better shape budget-wise than almost any state. I think we're doing really well. The other thing I would encourage, I'll kind of use this forum. A lot of us are doing COVID briefs as well. I've got a town hall with the Loudoun delegation next Tuesday evening, and with Dr. Avula. I don't know, Paul, if you're doing that or not, but we're trying to get as many messages out on that as we can, because obviously that is a real key to getting people back to work and to return to normal, is getting those vaccinations out. And what we want to do is try to do it in an orderly fashion. I'm proud to say we've quickly worked the problems we had. Dr. Vula and the administration is working hard, and we're now in the top 10 in America. So we're really doing quite well. But we have a lot of challenges ahead, but everybody is doing our very, very best, and we know you all are as well. And I'm very optimistic on where we're at. And if you have any big bills, give them to Paul. I miss Paul. We used to sit next to each other in appropriations. I miss him. He's a great guy.
I know. I miss you too, John.
All right. Well, any questions or comments on the presentations we received and those helpful updates from Senator Bell and Delegate Krizek? All right. Well, I think everybody's just trying to do you a solid, Paul, because they know you got to make a bunch of phone calls and they don't want to protract this meeting any longer. Thank you. And thank you to the members of our legislative committee as well as our chair. I think Delegate Krizek's comments really indicated how hard y'all are working, and we appreciate that. Okay, so why don't we keep moving on then, and we'll roll right into the Commuter Choice Program with a little bit of an update from Mr. Owen, who's here to talk to us. The application period is just closed on the 395-95 corridor, and I know, Mr. Owen, you have a few updates for us too on the 66, which may be a toll revenue shortage or shortfall ahead, although probably no shortfall in interest in transit programs to be funded by it. So let me turn it over to you for a brief presentation.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, and good to be with you all again tonight after a few months hiatus. The Commuter Choice team has had a busy couple months since I was last with you, most recently around that I-395-95 Round 2 call for projects, and I'll provide quick updates tonight on both of our active Commuter Choice funding rounds. So first, our I-66 Corridor Round 4 program covering fiscal years 21 and 22. Last fall, as you may recall, we split the programming for this program into two pieces given the precipitous dip in I-66 inside the Beltway toll revenues that began last March due to COVID-19. So the first piece of this was the $3.8 million initial program that the Commission and Commonwealth Transportation Board approved late last year. And that program is only allocating revenues that we already have on hand to new projects. So specifically, we're funding 3 continuations of transit service that were started in prior rounds, as well as 3 small capital projects. So for those 6 projects, we have now sent standard project agreement documents to the recipients, and we expect to execute those agreements in the next few months. Now, the second piece, as the chair alluded to, is a supplemental program to support new transit services, commuter incentives, and larger capital projects that were submitted to the call for projects about a year ago and remain under consideration for funding. So as the Commission approved in the fall, this supplemental program is to be based on application scores subject to funding availability and public comment. We are working with our Commonwealth partners at this time to get a better handle, or as good a handle as we can get, on what revenue may be available. And I expect to be back next month to provide an update on that. I will note that so far in fiscal year 21, across the first 2 quarters of the year, inside the Beltway toll revenue has not rebounded as we hoped it would, as the public health emergency has continued and commuters have not yet returned. So BDOT has not collected enough revenue so far to be able to transfer any funds to us for use for commuter choice purposes. As of the end of calendar year 2020, they indicated they were at about 60% of toll paying traffic, but about 30% of revenue. So yeah, it really has not picked up at all yet, but we will have more information on that for you next month. So I'll move ahead to the 395 part of the presentation and then come back for any questions at the end, if that's fine. So as mentioned, our round 2 call for projects just closed last Friday, January 29th. This round 2 program will cover fiscal years 22 and 23. You have a blue item among your handouts that identifies the 18 applications that we received. In a second, I'll show the full list in a slightly more graphical format, then go over upcoming steps regarding our review of the applications and development of a program of projects. But first, a few summary points. The total funding request for these 18 applications is $26.2 million. That's relative to about $30 million that we expect to have available for new projects over the 2 fiscal years. The revenue situation in this corridor is a little different from I-66 in that we're talking about roughly a 40-mile facility versus 10 miles and tolls being collected at all times, all days of the week, rather than just peak period, peak direction. So the concessionaire Transurban, their annual transit investment payments are due to the Commonwealth around the anniversary of 395 Express Lanes tolling each November. We just received the second annual payment, and that was the full payment of $15.4 million. In terms of high-level points, a couple others, about 60% of the total funding request is from NVTC jurisdictions and transit providers, whereas about 60% of the applications were from PRTC jurisdictions and transit providers. And I'll just mention about the volume, this is still kind of a difficult time for starting new transit services, particularly the types of peak period, peak direction, kind of commute-oriented services we've supported historically in both corridors. So that may help explain kind of the diminished response. We also work more closely with applicants this round to identify what proposals might fit well with the program. So there may have been a bit more kind of upfront vetting as well. Assuming we do allocate less than we receive, the balance will remain for use under future calls for projects. Next slide, please. So shown here are the 18 proposals we received. They actually cover the full length of the corridor pretty well. There are several proposed continuations of transit services that currently are in operation, mainly OmniRide services, but also a Fairfax connector service. A couple of significant local bus service expansions, not just limited to peak period service in Alexandria and in Fairfax County. All-day service improvements are allowable in this corridor because of the nature of tolling being, throughout the day, every day of the week. We received proposals for a few transportation demand management strategies, mostly around van pooling and carpooling, for when interest in those means of travel begins to pick up again. Those proposals were from Arlington County, OmniRide, and NVRC. A few proposals for park and ride lots, either expansion or construction of new lots in the southern portion of the corridor from Prince William County, Fredericksburg, and Spotsylvania County. And then one new proposed VRE feeder bus service going into downtown Fredericksburg. So we've just gotten going really on reviewing these for eligibility and making sure that we have all the necessary information to be able to evaluate the projects. Next slide, please. So really, for this month, our focus is on the eligibility review. We've gotten going on that. We will be sending questions regarding proposal eligibility and other clarifications to applicants early next week, aiming to get those out on Monday. And then we'll be meeting with our DRPT partners on Thursday to review preliminary eligibility determinations. By the end of the month, we will notify any applicants with ineligible proposals. And at next month's commission meetings on March 4th, both NVTC and PRTC will present the list of eligible applications. Next month, then, the focus will be on scoring all of the eligible applications. That'll be per the technical evaluation process that the commission's adopted in November. It is somewhat iterative in that we share draft scores with applicants to ensure that we captured anticipated benefits of their projects accurately. And we're also very careful to make sure that we're being consistent in our application of the criteria across all the proposals. In April, we will open a 1-month public comment period that will be entirely online. Also, the Joint Commission Working Group, which consists of 3 NVTC commissioners and 3 PRTC commissioners, will meet to review technical evaluation results and identify an approach to developing a program of projects for funding, subject to the public comment that we receive. In May, we will brief the commissions and CTB on the projects under consideration for funding, including scores and the proposed programming approach, and we'll wrap up public comment. And then in June, adoption of the program of projects by the commissions, and then the CTB for adoption into the 6-year improvement program. And we will promptly distribute standard project agreements for funded projects so that the implementation of those may begin when the new fiscal year starts on July 1st. So thus concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Owen. And actually, given the obstacles to starting new transit service that you mentioned, it's actually nice to see a fairly robust set of proposals from across the corridor.
Yeah. Good range.
Let me invite queries from the commission about either the projects we received or questions about this process. All right. Seeing none, I think we can look forward to seeing you then in May with some recommendations out of this good group.
Very good.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for all your hard work on it.
Thanks.
All right, let me move next into VRE. We do not have any action items this month, although again, everyone, we do have a closed session on a long-standing VRE item to follow. But we are joined by Mr. Dalton, Rich Dalton, the CEO of the Virginia Railway Express, and I will welcome him to give his monthly CEO report.
Well, thank you, Chair Crystal, and good evening, Commission members and others. You have the VRE CEO report in your packet, I believe at attachment 8B in the January 2021 update memo, which is attachment 8A. So I'll just speak to the highlights and some updates here. VRE continues to operate at a reduced service level, referred to as our S+ schedule. We continue to manage and enhance the health and safety measures that we implemented system-wide in 2020. And recently this week, the federal mask mandate was implemented, and as you recall, we fell under the state mask mandate through the governor's executive order 63 back in May. And as I've reported before, we're near 100% compliance on a daily basis, and that hasn't changed. So the federal mandate really hasn't affected us, other than we found some opportunities to enhance some messaging and stuff like that through the guidance in that mandate. So just wanted to ensure, Madam Chair, the Commission that we are in compliance with that federal mandate as well. For the month of January, we continue to see average daily ridership at about 1,000 per day, in addition to New Year's Day and Martin Luther King Day on January 18th. VRE did not operate service on January 19th and the 20th due to the heightened security posture in the district during the presidential inauguration. VRE returned to the S+ schedule on January 21st. On-time performance for the month of January was 92% system-wide. We had some weather-related delays in addition to some system congestion due to freight and Amtrak trains, but overall, good month for reliability. The majority of VRE staff continues to work remotely. All of our business functions are fully operational as we continue to maintain a continuity of operations. That's the end of my report, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you then, Mr. Dalton. And I know, again, we'll see a little more of you shortly, but in the meantime, questions for Mr. Dalton or our VRE team or our VRE chair, who is in the person of Elizabeth Bennett Parker tonight. All right. Without any VRE questions, then we'll move into a DRPT report, the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. We're glad to be joined by Director of DRPT, Jennifer Mitchell, tonight. I will turn it over to you for updates.
Great. Thank you, Chair Crystal. I'm not going to review the items that are already in our DRPT report, which have an update on some of the actions taken at our January CTB meeting. I do want to note a little bit of information, though, about our applications that we received for statewide transit capital funding this year. Each year, our application cycle ends on February 1st. So we have some preliminary indications of the requests that we've gotten. And as a reminder for those of you that may be new, ours is a application-based program. We evaluate applications and rank them against various criteria and then fund them according to their that prioritization. The majority of our funds are 80% of our capital funds every year have to be used for state of good repair projects. The remaining 20% can be used for major expansion projects. However, the CTB has the discretion to move those funds from major expansion over to state of good repair and what we call minor enhancement projects in order to meet state of good repair needs. And the reason I mention that is we had a very a banner year in requests for funding for capital funds. We received 557 requests for a total of about 221 million, and that compares to the 69 million that we have available for transit capital for our statewide funds. That doesn't include some federal funds that we can allocate as well. But as you can see, the requests are far greater than the amount of statewide funds we have available. And I should note that 69 million in those transit capital funds include about 28 million of carryover funds from previous years. So of the 221 million we received in request, about 157 of that is for state of good repair projects or minor enhancement, and $65 million is for major expansion projects. So as we are looking at how to balance the program and how to fund these projects, one of the things we will need to look at is being able to shift money from the major expansion into state of good repair to try to meet some of these state of good repair critical needs. These are all things that we'll be working out through the next few weeks. In addition to that, we will be looking at how we can make sure that we maintain our Wamana capital funding, our Wamana commitment to NVTC, as well as our statewide transit operating assistance. So we'll be working at these out, and they will be presented to the CTB in our draft 6-year plan, which is expected to go to them in March. So in addition to that, I did want to touch on our Wamana capital fund, and this again, our Wamana dedicated funding. We provide 154 million. Maryland and DC also provide funds for a total of 500 million. And our funds, it is required by legislation that all of our funding commitments be proportional. So the degree that any one jurisdiction has less funding, dedicated funding available, that would reduce the amounts coming from DC and Maryland as well. So we did present at I presented at the Senate Finance Committee's Transportation Subcommittee last week some forecasts that we have. Based on the new December forecast from taxation, we expect to see a gap of about 22 million in funds available for the Wamana Capital Fund. A lot of that is related to very dramatic reductions in the transient occupancy tax, which makes up a big portion of those of Wamana Capital funds. We also expect that this shortfall is going to continue into future years as well. Unfortunately, I think that's as a result of the longstanding impacts that we expect to see from COVID on the hotel and travel industry. So we are now looking at all available sources of state funds that we may have available to us to try to plug that gap. As a reminder, we actually also had a gap for this year for FY21. We were able to utilize some carryover funds from the previous year, plus the CTB allocated another 17 million in other funding to make up the gap for this year. So we will keep you posted as these as we have more information about this, but I want to make sure that you all were aware of that information which we just presented last week. So with that, I'll conclude my report, and I'm happy to take questions or comments.
Thank you, Director Mitchell. And I'll note, as I have before, how much we appreciate your seeking for other revenue sources at a statewide level to fill those holes before that obligation, which we all share, right, as part of the Metro Compact Agreement, falls on the localities. So any other questions for Director Mitchell or feedback? Okay, hearing none. Our last but never least report comes from our Executive Director, Kate Mattice, before we go into closed session. Kate, over to you.
Well, thank you. And in fact, as I always do, the shameless plug to check out the Executive Director newsletter. It's always great. If you want to go back and look at previous, you remember all the great things that happened during that month in public transit in Northern Virginia. I do want to remind you, it's come up a couple times this evening, but at next month's meeting, which is on March 4th, we will be welcoming Wamana's General Manager and CEO, Paul Wiedefeld, and also be talking a lot about the FY22 Wamana budget. So that's really the highlights of the March meeting. But before you go into closed session, I did want to share that our Return to Transit marketing campaign did launch this week. It's on local radio streaming services and online, and it was made possible gratefully from a grant that we got from DRPT, and it's being done in cooperation with all of our regional transit providers. And so the message is really about public transit's here to take you where you need to go. But even better, I've got Matt Friedman, who's just going to give you a teaser, and maybe if we can get the audio and the video to work, a little bit about what's in the airwaves right now. So Matt, can I hand it off to you and see what we can do in terms of showing some highlights of the campaign?
Sure, Kate, and thank you very much, and good evening to everybody. So as Kate mentioned, our 2021 regional marketing campaign is underway. It actually launched last Monday, the 25th, so we're now in our second week of that, and as Kate has suggested, it is made possible by a grant from DRPT, but there are a lot of local matches, and folks here know all the players. It's Arlington and Fairfax counties, the cities of Alexandria, Falls Church, and Fairfax, as well as OmniRide and VRE. And the theme this year is moving forward together. And we have a tagline that goes with that. That is, public transit is here to get you there. Now, for folks who were not with us last time, this is actually our second regional marketing campaign. And the first one followed the summer 2019 shutdown of 6 Metro rail stations in Northern Virginia. And that effort, I should remind you, won the Virginia Transportation Association Outstanding Marketing Campaign Award. So we have hopes for this one. Now, this campaign follows the 2020 Platform Improvement Project, but we delayed the start just to wait until some more people started heading back to work. So change the slide, please. So we're now in phase 1, which includes display ads on WTOP.com, WAMU.com, DCS.com, and other sites online. Change slide. And you'll also see social media ads. They're all over, really. They're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Change slide. and also, of course, on radio and audio streaming and podcasts. So you're going to hear those on news reports and traffic reports, and probably have been hearing them already. I know Kate hears them every morning. And you're hearing those on WTOP and WAMU. Next slide. And then this year, we also added in the Kojo Namdi show, which is very popular on WAMU.
Support for WAMU comes from Nova Transit. Throughout these challenging times, Northern Virginia's trains and buses continue to get you where you need to go. More at novarides.org.
And this last bit is actually the GIF ads, or GIF as others pronounce it, that works into our Facebook and Instagram ads. And those video ads performed really well for us in the last campaign. So we wanted to make sure that we included those as well. Now, speaking of video, there is actually going to be a phase 2 of this campaign. We have video ads that are in development. Those are going to be on YouTube, as we did with our previous campaign. And we're adding in something new this year called OTT, which is over-the-top television, meaning streaming services like Hulu and others like that. Next slide, please.
Support for WAMU comes from
And of course, all of these ads drive people to a website. That is novarides.org, which we used during the last campaign, but it has been redesigned this year. And one of the key things we added this year is COVID-19 and public transit resources. It's an opportunity for people to read some studies, see some news reports, and just sort of educate themselves about COVID-19 and transit. And of course, we still have our trip planning resources for all of the transit providers that serve Northern Virginia. And then the last piece of this is going to be the campaign analytics. In this digital world, we are going to get updated reporting quite regularly as the campaign goes on. We'll get a chance to see what's going on and if we have to make any adjustments. And that also gives us an opportunity to do a final report once it's all over, so we can get a sense of how well this campaign performed this time around.
I would say, yeah.
And Kate, back to you.
Thank you, Matt. So that's basically our teaser. So I do hope that folks get a chance to hear it on various radio or see it out on social media and otherwise. So that is all I have, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you, Kate and Matt. I can tell you that I heard it in the wild when listening to WAMU the other day. I was very excited indeed. So I also hope others have that experience. Any questions for Kate? Yeah, please, Mr. Schneider.
Sure. Dave Snyder, thank you very much, Kate. One of the things that I know that people are trying to use to encourage people to get vaccinated is people who have actually gone through it and can testify. Are you going to use some folks who have actually ridden the bus or pictures of the bus so that people don't get the sense they're going to be like jammed in like sardines, the way that may have been the case in March, and that in fact social distancing is possible, and that in fact people are wearing masks there to give them the sense of security? It's one thing to say we're open, but it's another thing to actually persuade people that their safety is not at risk. So are you working with some things there? And then going back actually to an earlier presentation about I-66, I'm be very interested to see what are the toll revenues we're getting in and what's being taken off the top. And it was a pretty negative report, so I would really like a whole lot more detail about that. But let me go back to your presentation and the marketing. Are you going to sort of do more than just say we're open and you ought to come here, and perhaps feature people that have actually done it and say, you know what, it wasn't that bad. You know, there weren't, you know, we weren't crowded in together. Everybody was wearing masks. You know what I mean? Question.
No, thank you, Mr. Snyder. I don't know, Matt, I know you're working very closely with the jurisdictions. Matt, did you want to say stuff? I can also talk to sort of what our local providers are doing in this space.
Mr. Steiner, I think that's a really great idea. That's not something we've worked on yet, but we can certainly take it into consideration. You know, we do have some budgetary limitations, just where we basically do animated videos, which are cheaper to produce than sort of live video, but definitely we can look for some opportunities, and maybe even in social media to work in some stories like that.
And if I could just add on, one of the things that has really been impressive is that each of the transit providers that we've been working with, and of course everything being sort of cross-posted, are actually doing a lot of that stuff as well. I just speak in particular for what VRE has been doing within their communication about how it's safe to be driving VRE or riding VRE, and I've seen a number of the other bus providers. But it's a great idea, and we'll see, what sort of creativity you can do within the budget. Even just having those influencers, as they say out there, can help a lot. So I appreciate those comments. As a follow-up on your conversation about toll revenues, indeed, in March, we are already working with VDOT to come back with more detailed report on what's going on with the revenues on I-66. So that is something that we are going to come back in March and share with the commission.
Thank you very much, Kate.
Madam Chair.
Please, Mr. Aguirre.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To follow up a little bit on Mr. Snyder's point, I guess I probably should have taken a picture. I was taking the bus. I just figured it'd be a little bit weird if I was taking selfies and everybody would have been looking at me, even though there was only 2 or 3 other people on the bus. But next time I ride the bus, I might think about taking some pictures.
I like that. You could be the testimonial. And to Matt's point, that fits well within our budget. As commissioners providing content for free.
Madam Chair.
Please, Ms. Garvey.
If I can pile on, I think it's actually a pretty good idea. NVRC has done some of that, with wearing masks and videos, getting things together with, we provide free content. We're great. Anyway, it's not a bad idea at all, I think. So I would kind of like the second or third, the suggestion. And I think be willing to get on and do some selfies, although I'm going to wait till I get my vaccine.
All right. Any other questions on either the ad campaign or anything else from our executive director report?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Please,
no, thank you. And I love these ideas and I love the campaign. It also reminded me of the work NVRC is doing. So maybe there's opportunities since there's limited funding to look at partnerships there. And I thought CANIC was going to bring up language. So I know there's limited funding. The upside of having these kind of videos is they're a little bit easier to translate. Obviously we've started a Spanish language media page for our stuff. So I don't know if that's feasible within the current budget, but targeting some of the Spanish language media, I think would be great.
It's an excellent suggestion.
We will definitely look into it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we do, before we conclude for the evening, do have that closed session on the VRE item. So just a quick logistical note, if you are watching along on YouTube, we will return to open session after closed session. So you'll see the YouTube with a notice that we're in closed session for now, and then we'll resume live when we get back to open session. And commissioners, this will all happen on this WebEx link. So stay on the link, don't go anywhere. I'll go ahead and make the motion myself, which is that pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.23711A3 of the Code of Virginia, the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission moves to convene a closed session to discuss one matter involving the acquisition of real property for public purposes relating to the Broad Run VRE station, where discussion in public would adversely affect the commission's negotiating strategy and bargaining position. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Unless there is any discussion, our clerk will call the roll to go into closed.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre.
Aye.
Mr. Elkhorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell.
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. De Ferenti. Mr. Eben. Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik. Mr. Letourneau. Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik.
Aye.
Mr. Reed. Mr. Smedberg. Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Turner.
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye. Ron, did you get
Motion
me?
passes.
I think we are live.
Okay. Well, on that event, Melissa, thank you very much. If we are once again in open session, then I shall say welcome back to the public and staff who might be listening or following along on that YouTube stream. And I am going to make a motion myself to certify the closed session, specifically that the NVTC certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge and with no individual member dissenting at the just concluded closed session, first, only public business matters that are lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under FOIA were discussed, and that further, only such public business matters as those identified in the motion by which this closed session was convened were heard or discussed or considered. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, thank you very much. I think Ms. Pelchik had it first, so that's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion about the closed session? Seeing none, our secretary will call the roll, please.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Gary.
Aye.
Mr. Elkhorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell. Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. De Ferrenti. Mr. Eben. Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik. Mr. Letourneau. Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik.
Aye.
Mr. Reed. Mr. Smedberg.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Turner.
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, thank you. So we do have an item, specifically a resolution coming out of closed session, for which I'd love to entertain a motion if someone's got one.
Madam Chair, I would move approval of Resolution 2439.
Second.
Second.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Bennett Parker. Seconded, I believe, by Senator Bell. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none, let me turn to our secretary to again call the roll on that resolution.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Gary.
Aye.
Mr. Elkhorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell.
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker. Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. De Ferrenti. Mr. Eben. Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik. Mr. Letourneau. Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik.
Aye.
Mr. Reed. Mr. Smedberg.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Abstain.
Mr. Turner.
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right. So unless there is anything else for the good of the order to come before the commission, all right, we will be adjourned for this evening. I look forward to seeing everyone in early March. Please do take care, stay safe, and be well. Thanks again, everyone.
Everybody stay well. Thanks.
Have a good night.
Chair.
Thank you.